So thanks for having me this morning, and welcome to Arlington. I'm David Cristeal. I'm the housing director here in Arlington County, and I'm going to, given the timing and given sort of what you've heard from Lisa and Gwen and Eric, my job is to connect the dots. And so here's a place to call home in Arlington. And by the way, the refreshments in the back are great, but if you want to go outside and spend money here, that would be really good. Exactly. Thank you. Little plug. So I'm going to follow the script. I'm going to talk about four things: the vision, some of the challenges, examples, and then actually vision, connect housing with the economy, the challenges, some examples, and we had a request for a certain example. And then I'm going to finish with a message that I think is important in terms of kind of what this means and how we're going to be successful. So we went through a planning process similar to what Gwen's talked about and something that Eric's talked about. We're helping him on. A couple years ago, the county board adopted unanimously a 5-0 vote, the Affordable Housing Master Plan. And we went through a lot of the same process that Eric and Gwen talked about. We got a group together. We got some consultants. We looked at data. We had a working group. We went through a community process. And we came up with a lot of findings, and I think because of the timing, there's two numbers that we focus on in terms of what the future is and what the vision is. Now this plan, Affordable Housing Master Plan, is really part of the county's vision. I think there was this notion of sustainability and diversity and inclusivity. That's the county's vision statement in here in this county, that we want a diverse, inclusive, and sustainable county, and so this plan fits into that. And what that vision is, there's two numbers up there. We did a lot of analysis, and we looked out over the next 15, 20 years, actually 25 years to 2040, and here's two things we want. These numbers up here, the 17.7% is that by 2040, we want 17.7% of the housing stock, that's the entire housing stock, to be affordable to folks earning about $65,000 a year or below. That's a lot of units, and that's a pretty significant number. Right now, we're about 9% of the housing stock in the county is affordable to that same income band. And that's a pretty wide band. We'll talk a little bit about that more. The second piece, and this is kind of important to sort of other parts of the future and also part of the politics of this, is that most of the efforts in the county, which I think are consistent certainly with the high-cost inner jurisdictions, this District of Columbia, Inner Montgomery, Inner Prince George's, Inner Fairfax, Alexandria, is focused on the rental stock. This 28.4% number is focused on that's the ownership stock, and it's saying that we want, again, in terms of when there's new home ownership units, not so much single-family homes. In Arlington, we don't have 19% of the county available for development. It's probably less than 1%, if that. It's not townhouses, because townhouses are a little expensive, and I'll go through some of those numbers there. But it is the new housing stock we want affordable to folks roughly from $75,000 to about $130,000 a year. So that's what the vision is. There's a lot of statistics and information and policies about what we're trying to do, really consistent with what's going on, what's happened in Montgomery County in terms of their process, consistent with what Eric's doing in Prince George's County. The district's going through a lot of its updates and plans and so on. Fairfax has got a plan. Alexandria's got a plan. We're all doing plans, and that's a good thing. Our plan is actually, we think we're pretty proud of it, and there's a lot of information in there. Who are we serving? And this is where I think this is really important, because I've got Mary Hines in the back who talked about this head, heart, and wallet. But it comes down to people. We're here because we're trying to serve folks. We're trying to help folks get into housing. This is kind of a kaleidoscope of who we are serving. And you can see it's a wide range of folks, from people that are just starting out to people that have been around a long time. I guess the Eisenhower generation is Eric calls them. And everybody in between. But it's folks that work in the police department, fire department. They do have all sorts of work here in the county. The other piece of this is these people putting the labels onto where these folks work. This is a sample of employers in Arlington County that we're trying to help. This is what this, kind of connecting this, not kind of, but connecting housing to the economy. And you look at the wide range of labels up there. A lot of these or some of the service workers and hotel, and you see the industries that are helping here. But there are also some of the folks that they come here, well, people come here for a lot of reasons, but they come here because of the quality of life, so you got the Accenture. So there's a wide range of incomes that the housing that we provide and help sustain helps the economy. And then this, here it comes. Again, about the economy, it's really, so Arlington has its niche and its employers, but we're part of a regional economy, and so it's important that when we talk about housing, whether it's here in Arlington or across the region, that there are there are employers in the region that we also need to pay attention to. We've got some of the federal employees, some of the private sector folks, but again, the notion is that we're really part of a regional economy, and we've got the housing strategies, whether they're in Arlington and Alexandria or Fairfax or Prince George or the district, Montgomery, they've got to sort of meet this need. And one thing I kind of skipped over, which is part of the vision, is that, and again, I think Lisa, Eric, and Gwen touched on it. There's sort of two groups of people that we're sort of missing, if you will. We do a really good job on the tax credit folks, the folks that are earning between $35,000 and $75,000 a year. And we've got our trust fund, and we've got our planning tools, and we've got the tax credit program. We do a pretty good job of that group. Not perfect. We've got a long way to go, but it's really the people that make less than that, the folks that are below $30,000 a year. Those are the folks that they're the hardest to serve. They've got the lowest income. Some of them have special needs. And so we've got to really put a lot of resources toward those. We've got our trust fund that we do. We've got the Housing Choice Voucher Program, Section 8, that helps those folks. The Arlington County has a housing grants program, which essentially is a parallel to the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And I think that's a population that's getting harder to serve because the prices are going up. So the gap in terms of what they can afford to pay, if anything, and what the market provides is really getting greater. And so we've got to figure out, we've got to come up with more resources. According to Gwen, sort of more money to help that population. The second piece that we're missing, or missing to some degree, is the folks that they make too much money to qualify for the government, the income restricted units. And so if the market is providing the new units that are very expensive, and we're doing with all the subsidies, whether the planning subsidies or the financial subsidy are going to folks that have to meet a certain income, it's that middle group that is getting squeezed. And so I think increasingly, particularly for places like the district, Arlington and Alexandria, inner Fairfax, inner Montgomery, that's a population that I think we've got to figure out, whether it's a rental solution, a rental apartment, or some sort of ownership option. That's what we've got to figure out, that group. So these are some of the challenges, at least in Arlington. These numbers on the top row, the top three are ownership options. These are average prices from 2016. On the bottom, these are the rents on the left side, it's the market rate unit. That's a $2,900 for a two-bedroom unit at the Latitude just down the corridor here. The bottom right is the Shell. It's a new development that HC did, and that's a two-bedroom unit. It's an income restricted, and that's about $1,500 a month. The top row, this is really the challenge for that millennial group or folks that are interested in ownership. Average single-family housing price in Arlington is $950,000. That's great if you can afford that. Townhouses are around $750,000. Again, for most of the folks we're talking about, that's out of their price range. And so you've got the condominiums on the right side, and that seems to be the supply that's affordable to the folks at moderate incomes. But it's a challenge. You can see if the market says it's about $3,000 per month to rent an apartment, but the people that are income restricted or modest wages, they can only afford $1,500 a month. That's really the problem we've got. We've got this pretty significant gap between what the market has for rents and what people can afford. This is getting into sort of what the solution is. I'm going to talk about finance capital, development capital, and at the end, the political capital, which is who you are. The county has a wide range, Arlington has a wide range of finance tools, which is the graphic on the upper slide represents, and then the planning tools, which the bottom slide represents. And again, perhaps in the Q&A we can talk about some of the details, but this upper slide talks about our trust fund. It's the county's Affordable Housing Investment Fund. We call it AHIF for short. But it's a loan fund that we have that's been funded since the 80s, but because of the way the demand has been, we've got it right now, the manager's recommendation is about $13.7 million for that trust fund. And this dollar graphic that Mary Hines in the back and Catherine and probably even Pat helped us with is really to illustrate what that fund is. And so you've got mislabels there. So if you look at the middle part, the 31 cents, I'm pretty sure that is the annual allocation that the county board provides. Mary's nodding her head, so that's right. The middle thing, it says series name. This is a loan. Even though it's a mission-driven loan, it still is a loan. So we get loan repayments. So of $1, about almost 40 cents of that dollar that we loan out every year is actually loan repayments, and that's a good thing. The third piece at the end there, that is labeled right. Those are developer contributions. We have in the county's zoning ordinance, there's a requirement for affordable housing for either on-site units, off-site units, or cash. That 18 cents on the end, that represents a cash contribution that comes from the development process that gets put into our trust fund. So even though in this year we might be putting up, the board hopefully will allocate $13.7 million to its budget process, we've got another essentially 60 cents coming from other sources to supplement this trust fund. I think it's been a really good vehicle, and it's consistent with what folks are doing across the country. I think in Arlington we've done a really good job of revolving those dollars, getting more money in, and getting them through the development process. We've got other finance tools that we've looked at that folks have talked about. In terms of our plan, we talk about the housing choice voucher and the housing grants as sort of a service, but it really is money. So we really have to understand that when we're putting money into these developments, it's a trust fund or a loan fund that helps on the development side with a gap. But there's also these housing choice vouchers and these housing grants that provide a subsidy to the tenant to also help afford those units. This bottom piece, the general land use plan, if there's something, I think the opening remarks talked about Bhutan being having a happiness index. I think our sort of equivalent is sort of a planning index. We love to plan in Arlington, and so and we do a lot of it, and people laugh about it. But it's I've become a believer. I'm not from here. I spent a couple decades in Chicago and North Carolina. But I've come to really appreciate the fact that in Arlington, our housing division is in the part of the planning department, and we've got a really good relationship with that planning department and the planning activities that happen because this is what we do. And so if you want to be part of the action in Arlington, you get with the planning program, and so and I think that's a good thing, and we've benefited from it. So we've got a general land use plan. This on the right shows I think it's the RB corridor, but the point about this is that this is getting to you all. We had a fairly significant community process that helped us get in the ordinance a requirement for on-site, off-site, or cash in our zoning ordinance, and that's a really important tool that we've used to sort of institutionalize the fact that housing and affordable housing or housing affordability is part of this planning fabric. And so we've got a lot of tools that were also mentioned in terms of bonus, in terms of special use provisions. I think we've got the only form-based code in the country where it has an affordable housing requirement along Columbia Pike. So there's a lot of planning tools that we've used. And again, particularly in terms of this conversation about, in terms of the people we're missing, I think for folks that are very poor, it comes down to mainly money. But folks in the middle part, I think it's less money, but more in the planning capital. How do we tweak the zoning and land use tools to accommodate folks that they don't need an income, a money subsidy, but there's a development subsidy that we can get by accommodating different kinds of units. And so I'm going to almost finish with the results. These are two developments that illustrate both the blend of planning and finance tools. The left, I think there was a request for us to sort of mention the church at Clarendon development. I think it's aging rather well. It was a Baptist church, and they had this notion that, hey, we want to serve the community, and part of this was trying to get affordable housing in there, and they went through a fairly lengthy community process, and hopefully the results, it looks a little different, but I think on balance, I think think it's working. And part of this is around telling stories, and so I think part of this narrative that we have, and Arlington's got a certain narrative that's happened over a period of time, and every jurisdiction in the region has a story to tell, and how we tell that story, and it's kind of telling it over and over and over, but as it evolves, as things change, it's an important way to help get better acceptance and maybe faster acceptance of what we know is a really significant challenge. The one on the right is Union on Queen, which is an example. I think Gwen mentioned this idea of how do you do preservation. This is a partial preservation, partial redevelopment. So on the left side, you see this garden apartment. The site before that, I think it's about 15-story high-rise, mid-rise was behind it. Those were 5 garden buildings on that site. We went through a planning process that said, hey, we want to recognize some of the historic and some of the features and form of this community, but we also want to try and accommodate some additional development. So on that particular site, there's 5 buildings on the 5 buildings on the site. The plan called for preserving the first 2 of those buildings and allowing the 3 buildings to be redeveloped. And so this is the result of that plan. You've got 2 buildings. There's one there, one on the left that you can't see. Those were 1-bedroom units converted to 3-bedroom units, and then on the back side it was a new development that the 3 buildings came down, the 50 units came down, and I think there's about 180 units on that back side. It's a mixed income development, so there's some income restricted units in that new development on the new the residential tower, but there's some market rate units. So this is an example of the planning tools and financing tools. There's about an $8 million AHIF loan, trust fund loan that went into that development. They got tax credits, and this is an example of something that's trying to kind of blend the notion of preservation and redevelopment at the same time. Both, I think, successful developments. The V Point that we've talked about and Mary's talked about, there's a $13 million county loan in that development. Even though it's mixed income, it's still, because of the construction costs, we had to go, I think, at 3 or 4 layers of parking. There's a big hole down there. It's very expensive to do concrete and steel and parking. That's really catty-corner from the Clarendon Metro Station. It's very, very expensive, and so in order to get those rents that low, you've got to have a lot of subsidy. I guess this is our information, but I think the message is there's, in really kind of simple terms, there's finance capital, development capital, and then that only works if there's political capital. And I do really want to kind of give a shout out to Mary and Catherine Scruggs in front of her and Pat McGrady, because they were really we up here and the consultants, and we can do the data crunching and we can come up with best practices, but if we don't have messengers for that message, and that's where you come in to really provide that political capital, all these great ideas and all this sort of fancy financing and hoops and land use tools, they're not going to go anywhere. And so I think it's really important that you kind of need all 3, but I think the political capital is really important. And again, the other piece that I think Mary touched on, is how we tell this story, how we integrate these 3 kinds of capital, really important for us as we move forward. So thanks for having me, and look forward to the questions.